Welcome back. This is another video from the Reptile Information Review. You may be wondering what you did to deserve this punishment. I don't know. What did you do? What'd you do? I would really rather be doing on a video on the stuff that I got from Mini PCR. No, not that way, this way. So equipment like, oh, well, those are Monchichis. There we go. That thing right there. So some of the equipment that I bought from Mini PCR to do the genotyping for lavender albino, I'd really love to do that video to talk about that, how that's going to revolutionize the industry, how a lot of people are working on that. But instead, we're going to make another video about Nidovirus. Why are we making another video about Nidovirus? Because people keep making stupid videos about Nidovirus. That's why. I mean, again, comp sci major. We're going to preface that. I'm a comp sci major, but I like to think that I'm literate. So, hopefully other people will join me and we can stop making Nidovirus videos. But until then, let's talk about the video that we're going to cover. And of course, we're gonna get ahead of the game. I just recovered from a copyright strike that was completely nonsensical, and so I'm going to use parts of this video, and if you hit me with a copyright strike, I'm going to win. Put the video right back up. That's the way it works. Like please, if you're going to try that, familiarize yourself with actual copyright, and then see if you actually have a case before you waste all of our time, because I will win, and I will put this video right back up. That's what's going to happen. I'm also going to go ahead and get ahead of the game and also say, for this video, we're going to talk about Nido, and we're going to say Nidovirus. We're, obviously a long time ago, it was collectively kind of renamed over to Serpentovirus. The reason for that is because Nidoviruses, of course, are a huge family of viruses. And people like to try to, muddy the waters or confuse the conversation or really just not make any sense out of stuff. So Nidoviruses, of course, are a family of viruses, and they affect a lot of different animals. But when we're talking about snakes, it is very unlikely that we are talking about the Nidovirus that affects fish, for obvious reasons. So when I say Nidovirus, of course, I mean the group of viruses that possibly infect snakes and cause some disease. And there's still a lot of stuff to be learned about Nidoviruses, but they've kind of collectively been changed over to Serpentoviruses. And that's what changes the conversation. So we're not talking about the one that affects fish. We're talking about snake affecting Nidoviruses or Serpentoviruses. For this video, I'm going to use Nidovirus because the people in the video that I'm reviewing use the word Nidovirus. So Serpentovirus versus Nidovirus versus the virus that affects fish versus the virus that affects... Come on. Follow along. You all can do it.
It kind of baffles me a little bit.
Right, exactly, MJ. That also baffles me too. Of course, that's taken out of context, but that's for a joke. So let's go ahead and get started and see if we can unbaffle some of these things, right? Right.
Why I've never heard of any snakes coming from Mutation Creation dying of Nido.
So this is kind of an interesting question, right? So people ask, why don't I hear more about Nidovirus if it's, covering the entire hobby, this and that, blah, blah, everybody's collection is going to die, right? So we're going to explain this, and hopefully, actually this will probably be the largest part of this video. But so this is the part that we're going to explain why you don't hear about everybody being infected by Nidovirus. And the thing that we're going to start with is veterinarians. So when it comes to veterinarians, the exotics hobbies themselves, have kind of had like a rough go at it with veterinarians, right? So there's kind of a mistrust, especially if you're in the US, you don't trust doctors anyway. You may be from an area where you've raised animals, let's say like, farmers in Wisconsin or something like that, where you go ahead and neuter your pigs yourself, So that kind of stuff kind of leans people to try to figure out, how do I treat this myself? How do I, what do I use? Where do I get the Manuka honey or the vitamin D or whatever the crap they're reaching for? So people try to self-treat these kinds of things without the help of veterinarians. And that's terrible. I'm definitely not telling you to do that. I'm telling you to go see a veterinarian for sure. However, some of that is not, let's say, unjustified, right? So if you were to contact the Association for Reptile and Amphibian Veterinarians, again, great organization, I'm not talking smack or anything like that, great organization, but ask them what their official stance on Nidovirus is, and you'll be surprised that they don't have an official stance on Nidovirus, at least not last time I checked, right? So what that means is that if there's, anything to do with Nidoviruses, they're not pushing out a consistent message, there's not standardized testing or anything like that for ball pythons or anything like that. So it's up to the veterinarian that you're going to see, and that even if they are a member of the Association of Reptile and Amphibian Veterinarians, may not even be well versed or understand Nidovirus. Some people are shocked to realize that it even exists, while other veterinarians are like, yeah, I've been following this since 2014. Which, you know, again, so some people have been in this hobby since before 2014 and have never heard of Nidovirus. So this is where we have to get the education going. And that goes with veterinarians, but also, you know, the individual people. And people, of course, can ask their veterinarian, well, I heard about Nidovirus. Why don't you test for it or something like that, right? So the point there, the reason that I bring all that up is one, your veterinarian has to be well versed in it, right? And in order to even start testing for it or something like that. So we're relying on veterinarians that don't have any guidance from associations like ARAV to test for this disease, and I don't think a lot of them do. In fact, the knee-jerk reaction of most veterinarians when somebody brings in a snake or any reptile really is to, let's get antibiotics. Let's do antibiotics. Let's roll out the antibiotics and pump them full of antibiotics and see what happens, right? Now, that's not the greatest. I mean, for one, you know, time is something that heals everything except for death, I think. Anyway, so it's just like if I got a cold and I decided that eating a carrot a day is going to cure a cold, well, that's probably not what cured my cold. What probably cured my cold is my own immune system and having the time to fight that infection. So the same thing applies for reptiles. You know, if somebody's pumping them full of antibiotics, it's possible that, you know, that either bolsters their immune system or their immune system just overcomes that infection anyway, and the antibiotics really didn't help. In fact, they probably hurt in some instances. You shouldn't overprescribe or overuse antibiotics. So, you know, the fast knee-jerk reaction of veterinarians just give antibiotics and go and then see what happens. And then, of course, if they recover, possibly just because of time, then they, you know, chalk it up as, you know, well, that's how snakes work. That's, you know, what snakes do or whatever. And then, you know, nothing ever happens beyond that. They probably aren't going to test for something like a Nidovirus if the antibiotics worked. You know, in general, you should ask for a culture, but, you know, they're probably not even going to test, you know, if the antibiotics seem to have worked and the animal seems to have recovered. And then, of course, that also relies on the individual taking it back to the veterinarian for, you know, a follow-up, right? So that's the veterinarian angle. So you can't really rely on veterinarians to do this. You have to be, you know, as a consumer of the veterinarian service, you need to educate yourself. You need to understand it and be able to translate that to your veterinarian just in case they are not familiar with this. And that's what we see on a lot of these YouTube videos. You know, one of the early videos for this channel, hopefully I'll remember to stick it up there, here, where, somewhere, right? So hopefully I'll remember to put that video somewhere in here. And you'll remember that it's one of my videos, of course, my beautiful handsome face, that is talking about a review of videos that we've seen. You know, one of those videos was Kevin McCurley that was just shooting snakes full of metronidazole, right? And it didn't seem like he had any veterinarian guidance. Maybe he did, I don't know. But there certainly wasn't any talk about testing. And they were pythons. So, I mean, that would be a perfect candidate for doing something like, you know, testing for Nidovirus, especially if they're exhibiting respiratory illness. You know, it's a great opportunity to go ahead and test those animals. However, that's not what we saw in the video. We also saw Clint's Reptiles, who said that he had a carpet python that, you know, had a respiratory infection. He went and got oral Baytril, and then that was the end of it. There's no mention of testing. There's not even mention of doing anything like a culture. There's definitely nothing about Nidovirus. So that's, you know, 2 for 2 so far. We haven't had any, you know, indication that we should be testing. And then, of course, also in that video, we talked about good old Liam Sinclair saying that if you stand in the sunlight long enough, you can't get sick. That is still the, oh boy, ooh, ugh, that one aggravates me. But let's skip over that certain piece of comical disinformation and keep going, right? So all of that are the reasons that, you know, veterinarians may not diagnose your snake with Nidovirus, may not even screen for it, but it's really up to you to try to advocate for it. Now, the individuals themselves, of course, before we even get to the vet, we need somebody to be able to look at their animal and say, that animal's not looking too good. Something's wrong, right? They need to be able to look at it and say, okay, there's something wrong. Now, we're going to look at chameleons as a good example. So chameleons will walk around with broken ribs punctured through their lungs and blood filling their body cavity. And they'll still eat and they'll still breed, right? So reptiles aren't very good at telling us that they don't feel so hot, right? My ball pythons certainly don't, raise a tail and say, hey, mister, I don't feel so good, right? No, none of that happens. You can't take a ball python's temperature and decide it has a fever or not, right? So the only thing that we can really do is try to evaluate our animals based on their behaviors, whether or not they're eating, possibly whether or not they're breeding. That's one that, so the eating and breeding thing comes from mammal welfare and really shouldn't count for reptiles anyway. But that's a topic for a different video. And whether or not they're bubbling, that's a good indicator that something's wrong, is if they're actually having respiratory illness, right? So it requires a keeper that's able to identify that there's something wrong. And I'm sure there's plenty of people that are like, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly when my snake is sick. You don't. There's no way that you can look at a snake and tell whether or not it has Nidovirus. You can't do that. It's literally impossible. Snakes don't turn purple when they have Nidovirus. There's nothing that really indicates they have Nidovirus in a lot of cases, except for maybe some respiratory illness. And I mean, a lot of keepers, again, since they avoid going to the vet, they're going to go and pump a cage full of Reptifogger loaded with F10 because they saw Brian Barczyk do that back in 2010. Stop, right? That's another one of those things. Time will probably heal that respiratory infection. Now, well, real quick, big, warning, come back down to earth. I'm not telling you to let a respiratory infection go and expect time to heal it. What I'm telling you is that if you stuff an animal into a box with a Reptifogger and the respiratory infection goes away, it was probably just time. But what you should have done is gone and talked to your vet, including talking to your vet about Nidovirus if they don't mention it to you beforehand. So there's two very good reasons. Veterinarians, including the Association of Reptile and Amphibian Veterinarians organization, do not have an official stance on it, and there's no pre-screening or anything like that, or standard testing or anything like that. So veterinarians may not even know about it and don't have any consistent behavior towards Nidovirus or preventing Nidovirus. So that kind of takes veterinarians off the table. But before you even get there, the keepers themselves have to be able to identify disease in their animals. And I would say a lot of our keepers can't do that. I would even confidently say that I can't do that. I would definitely confidently say that, the majority of keepers can't do that. And I would also volunteer that in quite a few cases, even somebody like Billy or Kevin McCurley or any of these people, they are not going to be able to identify illness in their animals until they start expressing these, disease symptoms, right? So they start bubbling. Now, to drive that final point home that people can't just, swing a pendulum, shake a magic 8-ball, or anything like that and decide which animals do or do not have certain viruses, or which ones, aren't healthy or anything like that. You can't really do that. All you can do is observe and do your best. But to further drive that home, and this is something that everybody, I'm sure you've probably heard me say it before, but people really need to listen to it. So, yeah. One of my favorite people, Pia Bartolini. So she works with Fishhead Labs, Dr. Susan down there. She had an outbreak of Nidovirus. She's worked with studies for Nidovirus. She has, you can talk to her about your testing results at Fishhead Labs, and she's very educated, amazing person, part of the Reptile Preservation Institute. You go check that out. I think they have like a Patreon, maybe a YouTube too. I'm not sure, but yeah. So great. Pia's awesome. One of the green tree pythons she talks about, she says, has had the highest viral load. Every time they go to test it, it throws a massive amount of the virus detectable by PCR, right? They look at the snake, and the snake has no clinical symptoms, no bubbles. It's not, raising its tail and saying, "Mama, don't feel well." None of that stuff is happening. It looks like a normal green tree python. And this animal is capable of throwing virus that can infect other animals. This is a contagious animal that has no symptoms that Pia can see, and Pia is much smarter than your average keeper. Sorry, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but that's, Pia is smarter than your average keeper. Certainly, better at being able to, do veterinary medicine on snakes than I am, because I'm a comp sci major. If she has a snake that she can't tell has Nidovirus, then how does anybody else look at a snake and tell it has Nidovirus? And the answer is, that's fiction. That's ridiculous and nonsensical, right? So the last point on here I'd like to make is that we also have certain, celebrities in the hobby, or however you want to say it, that kind of like Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's not Nidovirus, Serpentovirus, and Nidoviruses are a family. Yeah, we know that. We're not talking about the one that affects fish. We're talking about the ones that affect snakes. And there may be multiple that affect snakes, and there's certainly a lot of research that is still to be done. But not only do you have people kind of murkying up the scientific waters, or however you want to say it, but you have people that do that, and also murky up like the rumor and gossip, which is kind of what the video that we're eventually going to go back to reviewing kind of does. It murkies up the rumor and gossip areas. One of those people that have been on bp.net and have been over in morph market community forums just getting stuff flat out wrong, easily provable, captured from forum posts and everything else. Good old Dr. Travis Wyman showed up on a video not too long ago saying that people get blackballed for Nidovirus and just saying stuff that was just ridiculous. Talked about hygiene hypothesis and a whole bunch of other wacky doodle stuff. And so that really murkies the water, because you have a celebrity that's talking about these things that, he's a popular person and saying things that are just completely crazy. I'm here to tell you right now that there is not an Illuminati mafia secret organization that's going to blackball you from owning pythons and ban them from your home. That's ridiculous. It's not going to happen. If that was a possibility, then if you look at the current state of the reptile hobby, you've got a lot of people that are just pet keepers. You've got people that are doing the pet tube thing. They're not on, morph market community forums. They're not on bp.net. They're not, running through Facebook trying to figure out who has the latest beef with whatever. They're doing their own thing, creating content around their snakes. There's nothing that says that, those people are going to be affected if they get put on a do not sale list from Cletus's Pythons Incorporated or whatever nonsense, right? People will be totally unaffected. We always have the same scammers that come back and still take people for money. So we can't even identify the scammers, but you're telling me that people are going to be able to identify, somebody that one time back in 2018 somebody said had Nido, and then that relies on people that are getting that information being too stupid to be able to process that information, and then just assuming that, oh, well, they're blackballed or something like that. It's the most ridiculous power fantasy. It's dumb. It's dumb. Sorry everybody. You're not kingmakers. You don't drive the industry. You don't change PetSmart's purchasing arrangements. You have no power. It's just stop. So there's 4 reasons. Hopefully I've covered them all to help, to answer MJ's question, right? So right off the bat, you don't have anybody looking for Nidovirus. So that's why you don't have people saying they have Nidovirus, right? So the Association of Reptile and Amphibian Veterinarians does not have an official stance and does not tell people to pre-screen, does not tell people to do any diagnostics, right? So the veterinarians in a lot of cases aren't looking for it. They're just slapping out some antibiotics and off they go. Which brings us to our second point, is that the average keeper at a glance might say, well, pythons get respiratory infections, this is normal, and disregard a respiratory infection. Or they take them to their vet and the vet slaps them full of antibiotics and they get better, and so that's the end of it. They don't look any further. So there's two between keepers and veterinarians that simply aren't looking for Nido, and they haven't been doing it for years. I mean, we've known about this stuff and we've been able to test for it since 2014, and people still aren't doing it. It's like every couple of years it's news, it's brand new news, right? So no one's looking for it. The symptoms that people are seeing, they may not be able to diagnose correctly. They may think that those are like, it's normal for snakes to get respiratory infections and stuff like that. So they're disregarding the actual symptoms. And then on top of that, it's even hard to even guess those symptoms. The average keeper looks at a snake, you don't know if it feels good or not, right? So there's 2 very good reasons. The third reason is we've got people telling you about vitamin D stopping transmission of viruses and all this other disinformation that they knocked off of some other YouTuber, right? So we've got people that are literally presenting disinformation, and that includes people like, on the video that I mentioned before, that entire thing about cramming like some argument about vitamin D into a video about reptiles was just like, who is doing this? Who Actually, we actually know. So I actually wrote an article explaining who is doing that, right? But anyway, so let's get past that, right? So the idea that disinformation is permeating our hobby around, where these viruses are coming from, how they're transmitted, whether or not we understand these viruses, whether or not they're all benign. Dr. Travis Wyman was telling people to never screen their animals unless they have severe disease, which I want you to take 5 seconds and think through that real quick. I want you to think through that if you never test anything unless there's severe disease, but the thing that you're testing for is highly contagious, and one person actually, then what happens, right? So just think through that, and somebody please explain to me why you should not test unless you have severe disease. Why wouldn't you screen first? I mean, this again, so Dr. Travis Wyman, not a medical doctor. So to his credit, not a medical doctor. Just like I'm a comp sci major, not a medical doctor, neither is he. So somebody please explain to me why you would not want to screen your animals. So all of that disinformation and all of those reasons, people aren't looking for it. People are spreading all this misinformation. Veterinarians aren't looking for it. Some of this misinformation includes, trying to bully people with threats of blackballs or blackballing them and bully them off of the Morph Market community forums and all of this other ridiculous stuff, fighting them on Facebook and all this crap. Like, all of that stuff is the reason that people don't say anything. Like, even if they do know where they got it from, and in my case, so when I did end up with animals that had Nidovirus again, I went ahead and talked to those individuals and mentioned, hey, well, this is pervasive. Animals come in and they test positive for this stuff. So what do we do, right? And every single time is, you only get it from a irreputable breeder. That's not true. Rich people get sick, poor people get sick. Doesn't matter. Viruses don't care about how many stars you have on your ballpythons.net forum post or whatever the crap. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about your reputation there. Nobody cares about your thumbs up on Facebooks. You're still going to get infected with a virus if it's there, right? So none of that matters. None of it matters at all. And it's all just ridiculous disinformation around this disease that prevents people from talking about it, and it stops people from actually finding what we should be able to do to help protect these animals. Hopefully that answers the question.
Like,
oh yeah,
if somebody has Nido for a certain point of time, eventually things you just start seeing things unravel.
So this is another piece of disinformation that I really it's very, very pervasive, and I wish it would go away. But what I want you to visualize in your mind right now is the idea that one snake comes in, let's say it's infected, and now it's going to take out the entire facility at Mutation Creation. That's not going to happen. That's ridiculous. That's not going to happen. So the way that viruses generally work, is the ones that are the most successful are the ones that don't burn themselves out very quickly. And go look this up. I'm not going to make a video trying to explain viruses to you, and you can go look at this. Is the viruses that go undetectable, the viruses that do not have visible disease symptoms, are the ones that transmit more easily than anything else, right? So if you have snakes that have this disease that people are confusing for a regular respiratory infection, and they're not, turning purple, and their eyeballs aren't popping out, or they're not bleeding from their orifices, then nobody's really, it's that animal would just be there. The thing that prevents that animal from infecting every other animal at Mutation Creation has to do with the dynamics of the the spread of the virus, right? So, and this is another thing that Dr. Travis Wyman screwed up on the Morph Market community forums. Gladly post, the forum post for that. Just let me know if you're really interested in that one. The dynamics of infection, there's no virus that infects 100% of stuff instantly in a facility or anything like that. It's not how it works. And then, of course, if it was going to wipe everything out, then it would have burned itself out. We wouldn't have to worry about getting any sort of Nidovirus from Mutation Creation, because Mutation Creation would have failed miserably because all the snakes would be dead, right? So that's the supposed answer. Some of the dynamics for the way that the virus transmits is that, everybody knows go wash your hands after you go to the potty, right? So let's say, and we'll pick on Austin over at Mutation Creation. Austin comes in, he sees an animal that has a marker, maybe he wants to clean up the bin, check for eggs, something like that, pulls the tub, does what he needs to do, puts it back in. Now, over the course of the day, maybe they've got some F10, maybe they've got some hand sanitizer, maybe they've got chlorhexidine, maybe they've got some soap. Maybe Austin has to go potty. What does he do after he goes potty? He washes his hands. Now, the next tub that he goes into contact with, His hands are clean. He has reduced the possibility of transmitting from one to the next one. Now, there are other questions about exactly how Nidovirus spreads, but there are a lot of assumptions that we can make based on other viruses. So the assumption isn't that it goes floating through the air down the hallway and finds the first, it's like a Python homing missile and hits. That's probably not what happens. The theories that people have are that we're introducing that virus through fomites. So that's our own hands, our own tools, tubs, things like that we are, changing this animal's environment and introducing things to it that may have the virus on it, and that's how the animal gets exposed to it. That still requires that the animal gets exposed to a certain amount of the virus to become inoculated with the virus, right? So if they get one tiny virus particle, probably not going to be affected by it. So they need a certain threshold that they can actually become infected. And they need, tools that are being shared across tubs, and they need tubs that are being shared across animals, and they need, environments that are shared across snakes, right? So that's how these animals probably get, exposed to this virus and how the virus affects them. So in order for somebody to say that if Mutation Creation had one animal with Nidovirus, then all of the animals would, that isn't even true. Let's take another exaggerated and ridiculous example. So if Mutation Creation took all of their breeding animals and they put them in a kiddie pool and let them, poo on each other and everything else, and left them in there for a week and stirred them up and tried to make sure that every animal had the maximum amount of contact with the other animals, both through respiratory, both through, fecal or feces, et cetera, then even then 100% of the snakes probably wouldn't become infected with Nidovirus. Even then. Right? And then out of those snakes, we still don't even know how many will actually develop visible disease in order for you to even know that they have it. So that may be a little bit confusing, but the short version of that is that there's not a 100% transmission rate of this stuff, and then there's not a 100% morbidity rate of this stuff where everything suddenly crashes. Some of the animals will express the disease in different ways, in different severities, just like humans that, some people get a cold and they're bedridden for a week. Other people get a cold and they're still walking around transmitting it to everybody else. Could be the same cold, whatever. They react to that differently and express those diseases differently. So with all of that out of the way, I know that was like a lot to try to follow along with, and I probably didn't present it the best way possible, but let's actually jump into the science. This is direct, real science, right? So there is a paper titled, let me take a big breath for this one. So the title is Longitudinal and Cross-Sectional Sampling of Serpentovirus, Nidovirus in parentheses, Infection in Captive Snakes Reveals High Prevalence, Persistent Infection, and Increased Mortality in Pythons and Divergent Serpentovirus Infection in Boas and Colubrids. I almost made that one breath, but I didn't. I had to, kind of breathe in with it. Anyway, so that was back in 2019. So we have a very good paper studying, the effects of this virus and what happens. And part of that paper, go see it for yourself. I'll try to remember to stick it in the description below. But if not, then you can type in what I just said. That whole big thing. It's on Frontiers, right? And again, from back in 2019. So this isn't a brand new paper or anything like that. But it says, in this collection, infection was association. Round 2. Let me try. In this collection, infection was associated with significantly increased rates of mortality, with death of 75% of infected pythons and no uninfected pythons over this period. Let's break that down just to make sure. So that was death of 75% of infected pythons. Infected pythons being pythons that we know had the disease. They knew that these animals definitely had the virus. 75% of those animals that were confirmed to have the virus had increased mortality over the length of the study, which double check, sanity check this for me. I think it was a year, but double check by all means. Go look yourself. Don't trust the comp sci major. Don't trust the wacky doodle researchers that, talk about hygiene hypothesis. I'm talking about Travis Wyman right there. Anyway, 75% of pythons that definitely had the virus had increased mortality. That means 25% did not. So 25%, did they even have disease? Are they still trekking around and able to transmit the virus? It's very possible they could trek around and transmit the virus, right? So that goes back to the previous point of 75% died, so that one's easy. That's easy. They obviously, that was their disease. They died, right? But the other 25%, they're fine. They're living in if this was not part of a study, they would be living in somebody's collection, right? So you've got 25% of these animals that did not, have morbidity inside of the length of the study, right? And then of course it also says that animals that were not infected did not die. Right, or they did not experience any increased mortality, let's say, right? So animals that didn't have the virus didn't die. Animals that did have the virus, 75% of them died. 25% of them did not die. So this goes to support things like you definitely have a possibility to have an animal that did not die of Nidovirus in your collection, right? In fact, if we go and rewind to it was a couple years ago, so Jeremy Turgeon of formerly of Nerd, I don't know what he's doing now, but so he was a facilities manager or something like that over at Nerd. So he stated that if you have more than 10 animals, you probably have Nidovirus, and he based that opinion over his talks with people like Pia Bartolini and other researchers that he interacts with, probably people like Stephen Tillis, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the folks over at UF. I don't know if Jeremy talks to Stahl or anything like that, but he's talking to the big guns, or however you want to say it, right? And his opinion was that if you have more than 10 animals, you probably have it, right? Jeremy Turgeon formerly of Nerd, right? So he's telling us that Nerd probably has a Nidovirus animal. Mutation Creation probably has a Nidovirus animal. And if you're not screening and you have more than 10 snakes, you probably have a Nidovirus animal. This is just simply working with animals. We have this same thing in other animal hobbies, and people don't even recognize it inside of reptiles. Let's talk just a real quick jump over to something like parvo in dogs. Now, parvo has it's pretty serious, especially when it affects puppies. So it's nothing to sneeze at or anything like that, and is catastrophic on these animals. Parvo has not been wiped out of the entire world. Parvo still exists. Parvo is still being transmitted. And we have precautions in place to prevent the spread of parvo, just accepting that parvo is a fact of dealing with dogs, right? So what we have to do is accept that Nidovirus is a part of dealing with snakes, and we need to do things like screen and isolate, and then also make sure that our hygiene is up to par. And again, I will repeat, I firmly believe that Mutation Creation has great hygiene. And if they have great hygiene, that doesn't mean they have no Nidovirus snakes. That just means the chances of transmitting Nidovirus from one animal to the next is reduced. One snake in your collection, it's not going to destroy your whole collection, right? Unless you're rubbing that snake on every other one and it has a 100% transmission rate, which seems to be something that really you shouldn't expect. Maybe you're in there swabbing their mouths out and swabbing, I don't know. Like, you'd have to really try in order to get all of your snakes infected with Nidovirus. But the risk, of course, is even if you infect one other snake, 75% of the snakes in the study previously had, morbidity within the length of the study. So the risk is higher than any sort of inconvenience for washing your hands or screening or anything like that, right? So the video that MJ and Lord Elion, I always say Elion, Lord Elion and Mutation Creation and everybody else and all this effort going into rumors and gossip and all this other crap, wash your hands. Do it right now while you're watching this video. Go wash your hands. Look, you've just reduced the possibility of transmitting Nidovirus.
Honestly, I don't know. Like, I feel like people just like to spread rumors.
So people just like to start rumors? Like, what is this supposed to... So you have somebody that says that there were snakes from Mutation Creation that developed disease, and they have a piece of paper that says they tested Nidovirus positive. And your counter to that is to say, rumors, people just don't like me. This is what? This is my, what? Like, where are the adults? We need to contact an adult in the room to see, why would this even be a thing that you... It's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. Now, in the middle of all of this, of course, the chat for MJ's video has Austin in it. It has somebody with the Mutation Creation YouTube account, probably Billy. And then, of course, it has Catherine from Stellar Serpents. And all of them are like, no Nido, no Nido, no Nido. You're saying you don't have Nido, and you say it's all a rumor because you believe you don't have Nido. There's nothing scientific here. Person has veterinary report that an animal, it's dead. The animal died. That's a fact. And you're saying, no Nido, everything is a rumor. somebody has more evidence here, and somebody else sounds not good, not good at all. I don't. Why would you even? Why would you even say this? Why is this the go-to? Is to say that it's just rumors. Let's not actually do any testing or screening or anything like that. Let's just call everything that I don't like a rumor. It's dumb. That's dumb. It's just silly high school crap that happens in the reptile hobby. Like this is what always happens. I'm sure the very first things that were fired across the board, because this happens every time, is somebody was probably like, well, you don't know how to take care of snakes, and you have too many leaves or not enough leaves or the wrong type of cocoa blocks. You should have used ReptiChip instead. And people come up with all these ridiculous theories and nonsense on why somebody doesn't know how to take care of snakes, but they literally have a piece of paper that says Nidovirus on it. No amount of shilling for one cocoa chip versus another cocoa chip is going to change that you're not screening for this disease. Come on, do the science. Stop doing the baby brain stuff. Stop doing the baby brain stuff.
And I'll be worried about my collection. Austin would be worried about his collection there. Like, we wouldn't be making the moves we're making if that was the case.
This, again, so I don't think that, Austin's collection is going to die. I don't think Lord Elion's collection is going to die. I don't think all the snakes in Mutation Creation are going to die. Hopefully, I explained why that is. Hopefully people followed along on why that is. So it is incredibly unlikely that even if there is, let's say 10 snakes with Nidovirus in Mutation Creation, that those 10 snakes are going to infect the entire building. In the middle of all that, that would assume that people are just doing incredibly reckless things like rubbing snakes together on their lunch break for no apparent reason. That's going to assume that everybody at Mutation Creation doesn't wash their hands, doesn't do any of that stuff. They love to rub snake crap all over themselves and then grab other snakes and rub that's ridiculous, right? So is Lord Elion's collection safe? Probably. Is Austin's collection safe? Probably. Is most of the snakes, between those two collections and Mutation Creation, are they safe? Probably. Are there snakes with Nidovirus at Mutation Creation? Probably. But because of the work that they do there, they have probably reduced the chances of the transmission of that virus to the whole collection, or however you want to say it. And even if they were exposing the entire collection to Nidovirus, chances are that those animals would not express disease. They might be that lucky few that aren't expressing that disease, the 25% that survive, after the study was done, for example. Or they may just not have been inoculated with the virus. They haven't got enough exposure to the virus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But more than likely, it's because of the great work they do. So instead of saying the great work that we do here at Mutation Creation, that includes, washing our hands and making sure that all of our juvenile snakes and all of our hatchlings are in one side of the building and all of the adults are on another building and they don't ever cross, and people work those two different sides and different sides of the week so that they don't have to go back and forth, and all the hatchlings aren't put right in the front door in front of the break room. All of these things would be better things to talk about than my reputation is too good to get sick. That doesn't make any sense. So I don't really care that Billy trusts Lord Elion. I don't really care that Austin trusts Catherine. That doesn't make any difference to me, because inevitably they're still going to catch a cold, they're still going to catch the flu, they're going to catch normal sickness that you get interacting with other people, and you're going to move Nido from one animal to another if you're dealing with all of these, the number of snakes that Mutation Creation deals with. So really, I'm telling you, and just make it super clear, because I've said this before and people haven't caught on, Nidovirus is a mistake, and it takes very few mistakes to create a significant risk. And that significant risk was, again, 75% of those snakes that did have that virus did not make it through that study, right? So that's the risk. It's a mistake. There's no way, you're not going to convince me that Austin, Catherine, and Billy, and Lord Elion are they're twirling their bad guy mustaches. I'm going to kill all the snakes. I'll show that. Even if they tried to kill all the snakes with Nidovirus, they probably wouldn't be able to do it anyway, right? Because of all of the factors I've already said. It'd be really difficult to try it 100% in effect at some place like Mutation Creation by just trying to expose every single animal to Nidovirus. They probably couldn't even do that if they tried, right? It's a mistake. It's a mistake. So what do you do to try to prevent those mistakes? Well, we wash our hands and we keep the hatchlings on a different side of the building, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what this video should have been about. Well, not this video, the video that we're reviewing. So MJ's video, that's what it should have been about. That's what videos that the Herpetoculture magazine and stuff like that put out. That's what they should have been about, is how to reduce the transmission, not arguing whether or not they're benign or not, or trying to tell people about hygiene hypothesis. No, stop. It's dumb.
The one thing Billy has are people that ride with him. He has a family. He has a community. You ain't taking that away from Billy ever. So these people who try to come at him will realize that. I would, if there's people coming at Billy, I would be careful. You don't want to come at Billy. Billy has, like, I'm just saying, like, he will ruin your shit. Like,
there is so much wrong with what MJ just said that I'm convinced that was a mistake. Maybe he didn't mean to say it that way. I'm not 100% sure, but so he's saying that if you come out and you say that you have Nidovirus and it came from Mutation Creation, then Billy and all of his followers are going to ruin your shit. I'm going to pretend that that's not what happened, right? But just for the sake of keeping the video going, let's review back, when MJ asked, why don't I hear about Nidovirus more often? Maybe this is why. This aligns with, Travis Wyman's claim that people are blackballing people that have Nido and all this other stuff. And right now you're telling everybody that, Mutation Creation and the followers of Mutation Creation should go harass and bully. Do you hear yourself? Like, don't repeat that. Even if you think that's what's going to happen, even if you're not saying that you should do that, but that you think people would, don't do that. Why? This is the most, I'm going to pretend that this didn't really happen, right? So if people in this hobby really believe that they were kingmakers and they were all powerful and stuff like that, then let's take Go Herping for an example, right? So is Go Herping, an upstanding member of the hobby? No, but he's doing just fine on YouTube, and he's doing just fine, selling animals that he probably really shouldn't be selling. Let's go ahead and just flat out call it flipping, right? So really, like, if we had kingmakers in this hobby, don't you think they would have stopped that from happening? Don't you think they'd be able to stand up and say things like, we're going to go ahead and push forward and finally find out, if UV light does affect ball pythons? We're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to do actual studies. Like, where are these kingmakers that are making such a difference in the hobby? And what you're going to find out is we don't have those. That's a lie. That's a boogeyman. No matter how many do not sale lists people try to put me on, it's never going to affect me. So if it's never going to affect me, then why would it affect somebody like Billy? Stop. Now, the worst part of this is that hopefully it's taken down by the time this goes out, but if you look on the Mutation Creation Patreon, somebody at Mutation Creation went and grabbed this person's Facebook and pictures of their partner and, all of this stuff, and unedited threw it up on the page so that everybody knew where they were from, and, all these other details that, it's public on Facebook. But somebody at Mutation Creation has driven people over to the personal information of the person making this complaint. So that lines up with MJ saying that Billy is going to ruin your shit, but that's not, that's borderline not even legal in a lot of cases. So maybe stop being embarrassing, reptile hobby. Please stop being embarrassing. That's not a good thing to do. That should not have gone up on the Patreon for Mutation Creation. That should definitely not go without consequence. And don't do that to people. If you have beef with people, or however you want to say it, like, don't run around on Discords and don't run around on Patreon spreading their personal information or any of this other crap. This is so dumb. And this is stuff that we've seen from other YouTubers as well. Donnie over at Nerd is well known for starting a war room on Discord to coordinate ways that he's going to, go after other people. Good old Liam Sinclair from Reptiles and Research, when he went after Nerd, I guarantee you there was a Discord or Facebook group or something like that where they tried to collect all this information and everything else, and tried to get to fight each other and stuff. Stop being embarrassing. Everybody that I've just mentioned, including MJ and including Lord Elion and including everybody, sit down for a moment and let's see what we could do to positively influence the hobby instead of literally trying to harass each other. Maybe we can do that.
In the breeder females, we deal with like any snake that might be sick and stuff, right? And there's not even many. There's literally, I probably counted last time maybe 6 in the breeder females, and Billy has over like 400 or 500 females in there. So there's not many snakes that are sick, and even the ones that are sick, we're constantly doing stuff to making sure they bounce back, like giving them Da Vinci, treating them with medication. So it's not like we allow a sick snake to just die and rot.
So this is probably the most damning part of the interview. So Lord Elion mentions that they actually do have 6 snakes. He says that it's few, but they do have 6 snakes. Okay, so is it the same 6 snakes for a year? Do you rotate those out? Does it, ebb and flow and increase and decrease? I'm sure it does, right? Are those snakes being screened for nidovirus? And I would assume they're not, because why wouldn't you bring that information with you to this podcast if that was the case? If you want to talk about nidovirus and 6 snakes, why wouldn't you bring the receipts with you, right? So Guelph, University of Guelph can test those snakes for you. I'm going to talk anymore about that. That's so one of the other things that that Lord Elion did mention is that they're treating with medication. Where's this medication coming from? Do you have veterinarians that are able to, are they the ones that are giving out this medication? What medication is it? Like, are you doing cultures and confirming that this is, a bacteria or something? There's not a lot of information there, not any information on whether or not it's veterinary guided. I'll tell you one thing that is definitely not guided by a veterinarian, and that's the usage of Da Vinci boa. If you look at the back of this thing, it's got like panthenol, and it's got, all sorts of vitamin A acetate, which was long known that we don't give that to reptiles. People were killing their beardies with it, right? So Da Vinci boa it doesn't even have the quantities of the vitamins and minerals that is trying to deliver. So we don't know if we're even if that's too much that could cause injury. Probably not. I don't think Da Vinci boa is injuring snakes, but there's a possibility it could be too much and causing injury, and we wouldn't know. Or if it's not enough to even make a difference. So in that case, it's literal snake oil. You might as well be, putting essential oils or something or whatever you get from Gwyneth Paltrow, steam some cloacas, whatever, right? So it's not. There's nothing on there that indicates what the quantities are. That are being delivered to the animal. There's nothing that indicates that we should even be supplementing snakes with things like panthenol. The Da Vinci boa is snake oil. So you're treating your 6 snakes with snake oil instead of going to the University of Guelph to get them tested for nidovirus. Science?
For you to accuse somebody of this, Nido, that's not good. After he sold so many snakes to people.
So here's again where MJ is just pushing the fact that Billy's reputation is just too good to even possibly have a sick animal in his collection. And I mean, part of that, of course, I'm going ahead and projecting that in there. But really, I mean, listen to the clip and tell me what else that's supposed to mean. The fact that Billy has sold a lot of snakes and nobody's come back with Nido, well, that can be explained by, the beginning of this video. Are people even looking for Nido? Are they going to the veterinarian? Is their veterinarian looking for Nido? Are they somebody that's capable of looking at a snake and realizing that there's a problem here? Are they sending their animals off for necropsies to confirm what they died of? Or are they making a little, thing in the backyard with a little cross and burying their, Bubba the snake back there and not saying a word? So this is why you're not hearing of nidovirus, right? Is because these are the things that people are doing, and they're not going to the University of Guelph, including Mutation Creation, who could easily go to the University of Guelph, who I'm sure would be glad to work with them. In fact, the person who started the supposed rumor about nidovirus at Mutation Creation directly worked with Guelph to get the snakes tested. Process that for a second. So one side is all rumors and gossip and my reputation is too good to have a sick snake. And the other side is doing science. It's bad. It's just a bad look for the hobby, right? So you could do science, you could do things to prevent the transmission of this thing. You could explain to people how to prevent the transmission of this thing. You could explain that you probably have nidovirus in the Mutation Creation facility, but you reduce its transmission and the chances of its transmission by the way that you work. And then you could also go through and do things like snakes that have obvious disease, test them through the University of Guelph. Or you could go on YouTube and talk a whole bunch of stupid crap about reputations and rumors and how nobody else knows how to raise snakes. This is the problem. I'll say it again. Nidovirus is a mistake, but you compound that mistake with stupid when instead of doing things like promoting sanitation, hygiene, diagnostics, science, instead of promoting that, instead you want to talk about, how you Patreon members should go and harass somebody and ruin their shit. This hobby is like 40 and 50 and 60-year-old people. Why do I have to explain this to you?